On tonight's episode of How Effed Up is Effed Up, that's effed up. So you need a sailboat hull, but this whole fiberglass thing is a bit too new age avocado toast for you, and steel hulls are a bit too bougie for your less than baller budget. What's a sailor to do? Is there something that you can use for the hull that's super cheap, relatively easy to maintain, and repairable anywhere in the world with a bucket of water and some sand? What if you made it a boat out of something crazy, like, say, cement? Yes, cement. I was blown away when I was a kid and I first saw a cement boat, thinking, why in the world would you make a boat out of something the mafia used to make swimming shoes for people that they didn't like? We should clear up a common mistake first. There is a difference between cement and concrete. You know those things as kids we called cement trucks? Well, they don't actually haul cement anywhere. They don't haul cement at all. It's a conspiracy that runs deeper than my feelings towards zinc anodes and salt water. Cement trucks actually haul concrete, and concrete is not cement. It's made from cement, but you have to add fire and some rocks first. It's like saying eggs and flour are cookies. I mean, they're in cookies, but they just aren't cookies by themselves. Cement is usually used to refer to a sort of mortar kind of like material made primarily of sand and water with some additives that changed over the years. They include clay and shale, iron ore, things like that. Think of it as a mortar and not a structural material. That mortar cement is then superheated and things are added to it to make it structural, like stone or gravel. And when it's done, it's called concrete as soon as it's done cooking. That's the stuff we make our sidewalks out of in our backyard patios. That's the stuff that us Canucks up here in Canada built this little radio tower out of in the 70s. We use 63,000 cubic yards of the stuff. What can I say? We like our radios up here. So if cement is more of a mortar and concrete is more of a stronger structural thing, why don't we just make the boats out of concrete? Well, we did. In World War I, there was a big problem in the world. Everybody was running out of steel very quickly because of the war. But everyone still needed to build huge ships. Not only fighting ships, but transport ships that could bring the war machine across the ocean. The problem with these colossally heavy ships was that some of them didn't last very long. And while some did see some combat, and many did cross the Atlantic Ocean to make war, most were eventually lost or scuttled. What we did find, however, that when you scuttled one of these things, they made a very good breakwater. So enter ferro cement. Instead of heating the cement and adding some stones to make concrete, what if we use the much lighter cement mortar? It's easier to work with, and because it's more like a mortar, it's still super cheap. Ferro, meaning armored cement, ferro cement, the building processes were developed by a couple of Frenchmen, both named Joseph. Seriously, Joseph Monnier and Joseph Lambeau. And what they did to prove their ferro cement concept and its worth was they built a boat in 1848. The process for ferro cement is fairly simple. It's a wire mesh and it's laid out to form the hull or whatever shape you want. And then you run some reinforcing steel rods through it, kind of like rebar. The whole form is then filled with the cement mixture as sort of a mortar, and it's shaped and honed to form the perfect hull shape. If you ever did the art project in school where you built a frame out of chicken wire and then you cover it with paper mache, that's basically it. I made a Dodge Ram and it turned out so well that no pictures were ever taken of it. During the process of building a ferro cement boat, you have to be very careful that the steel mesh, the chicken wire, and the rebar is completely sealed from the elements in that cement, because any air pocket can allow water and air to get to the steel and the steel will rust. And later that can lead to a complete and total failure of the entire structure. Rust is bad. So while this ferro cement seemed to be some sort of miracle material at first because of the ease of use and that anybody can do it, that became an obvious problem later. You see, there weren't always boat manufacturers stamping out production boats for us to buy. In fact, before the 1950s, it was far more common that you were going to build your own sailboat. Nobody's going to do it for you. And this is where Faro actually gets a really, really bad name because it's so easy to work with, and wood required significant woodworking skills and tools and much more time to actually build the boat. Lots of the backyard do-it-yourself sailboat enthusiasts started building Faro cement hulls. The problem here is that while it is kind of easy to do, if it's not done right, they simply fall apart later and not much later, or they crack and they sink. And because they're home built, it's hard to know if the builder did a good job until it's way too late. Also, now that in more modern times, most of us are required to have insurance on our boats, and Faro cement can be a huge problem to insure. Most insurance companies won't even talk to you if you have Faro cement, and the ones that do usually require a survey and a core sample of the hull. It's like being a normal guy and trying to date a Kardashian, whatever one of those is. That isn't to say that they're all bad, however. There have been some extremely successful homemade Faro cement boats, and just a few companies over the years that did stamp out production hulls, and they did a very nice job. They're still in the water today, they're still cruising. Usually what the Faro folks say, the fans of these boats, is that when you see one, if you can't tell that it's cement, then it was probably made properly. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make this whole channel possible. A big shout out to this week's newest patrons. We have Chris and Thomas. Thank you guys so much for joining the team. So should you buy a Faro cement boat? Let's talk pros and cons. Faro works just like fiberglass, where you have some sort of framework for tensile strength. Steel mesh and rebar or woven plastic fibers. Same sort of concept. But the Faro is known to be weaker, the weaker of the two. In fact, in several studies, Faro was found to be the weakest of any hull material, which is kind of scary. Grain of salt, though, it's not a terrible material to build with. Faro really only works on bigger boats, though, above 40 feet or so. And this is because Faro walls can only be so thin. So if you make a small boat, it's going to have hugely thick walls and be insanely heavy. So if you're going to buy a Faro sailboat, don't buy a small one. Another problem you might not readily think of is weight. And let me explain. Because Faro is so heavy as a material by nature, it's going to need a bigger sail plan to make the boat move through the water efficiently, which is not a problem. We can make the mast taller and add bigger sails, right? With bigger sails, however, comes the need for more keel to counter the added wind and avoid the boat giving too much to leeward while you're sailing it. More keel means more weight, which means more sail plan to counter the more weight. You see where this is going, right? The next issue with Faro that might not catch your attention immediately, but you do have to consider is, how do you mount cleats to it? How do you mount anything to it? Nothing is going to stick to this material very well, so you'll have to drill holes. And they won't be tappable holes that you can thread, so they need to be through holes. And then you have a highly localized load, like a cleat, on cement, which usually just cracks. Now, all this sounds really bad, but Faro does get a very bad rep for the boats that were made in the backyard by someone who has no idea what they're doing and usually drives a truck with no box on it. A few bad apples really does spoil this building material for a lot of people, but there are some very solid, happy boats out there cruising right now. So can you find one? Sure, as long as you're willing to do the work that you need to make sure that the hull is sound and it was well made, and you put in the work to maintain the boat over the years, and you're willing to try to find an insurance company to insure it, you can get one heck of a good deal on one of these Faro boats too, because not a lot of people actually want one. Many owners do give one final warning also. Faro does a very good job at hiding previous repairs or damage. Owners have put anything and everything on these boats to repair damage, and more often than not, it's not done properly. Faro can be repaired a lot like fiberglass, however. Where you need to, you can add more wire mesh to support the structure and then add more cement to bond it all together. It's not rocket science, but then again, neither is the same repair in a fiberglass hull. That's it for this week, guys. I will see you all next week, and tune in because I have a very special surprise for you guys next week, and it relates to internet on a sailboat. We're going to test some new technology that we've all been waiting for a really long time.